All right. Welcome, everyone, to this session on working hand in hand, how employers and higher ed can engage more helpfully and successfully together. I'm Sacha Litman. I'm a partner and associate director at Boston Consulting Group, spending a lot of time on these issues at this intersection. I am joined today by, well, starting from the end, Krishna Kumar, the CEO and founder of Simplilearn, Yakut Gazi to his right from where you're seated, Vice Provost of Learning Innovation at Duke University. We have Conrad-Bradshaw, the VP of Corporate Markets at Cengage Group, and Aarti, well, I jumped out of order, Josh Jarrett, next, SVP of Strategy at Wiley. Did I get that right? Okay. And then Raya from Cengage Group, and finally, sitting next to me, Aarti, Dhupelia, who's the Vice President for Undergraduate Education and the Dean of the Undergraduate College at National Louis University. So really, as always, a very interesting and diverse set of panelists. I want to just sort of frame the session out a little bit in terms of what we're going to try to answer here, and then turn to the panelists to hopefully get into a very good, engaging dialogue on both things we agree on, and hopefully where the grist comes, the things we don't agree on. So first and foremost, my take on this is that the issue with higher ed employer partnerships is that there are a lot of point solutions to the problem. You'll see a lot of sessions here, and maybe some of you in the room subscribe to this or are involved in companies that do this, focusing heavily just on internships or are focusing on curricular alignment. And I think we're actually leaving a lot of money, both metaphorically and physically, on the table in terms of the potential that higher ed can take in terms of really unlocking a lot of the talent gap issues that employers are experiencing. And the reason that that often isn't happening from our vantage point, and working on this with states, with employers, and with higher education institutions, is that we're often not seeing the conversation at a level of what would it take step change for higher ed to triple, quadruple, take whatever multiplier you want, the supply of talent in a certain skilled area or in the quantity of folks in that skill that would actually meet an employer's needs. And the reason that that doesn't happen largely, at least from my perspective, is first, we don't really see enough conversations coming from the top. We're not seeing the CEO and the president of the university sitting down together and saying, from a demand side perspective, how can you become my preferred provider for this? Number two, the employers often don't really understand what their needs are going to be for their workforce in 4, 5, 10 years. And realistically, higher education, even if the community college level, takes at least 2, 3 years to graduate a new slew of students with the right set of skills and in the right number to match the employer demand. So you've got to really align those timeframes. And there are a lot of other bottlenecks that could be addressed in terms of workforce, in terms of the paucity, for example, in healthcare and hospital systems, the paucity of faculty to teach in nursing programs is one of the key impingement points on the growth of that sector, or the number of proctors to be able to work in the clinical rotations. That can actually be freed up with employer relationships as well, because their employees could also take on teaching jobs, which, by the way, also help those employees want to stay in the jobs longer because it gives them new opportunities. So there are all kinds of possibilities when we think about this from a holistic perspective that I'm hoping we're going to get into today. So let's jump into the panel here. What I would love to kind of hear is a couple of things. First of all, where do you sit? Again, we just went through your titles and your organizations, but we really represent a smorgasbord of different perspectives on this. Where do you sit in the ecosystem? And what do you think it's going to take in terms of success in education employer partnerships here? If I could start at the end with Krishna, and we'll work our way down the line here.
Thank you, and thank you for giving the context, Sacha, and good morning, everyone. So on this topic of engaging employers in higher ed, so I'm sitting on both the sides as an employer that hires from higher ed to work for Simplilearn. I think there we see a lot of possibility of doing something together so that they can embed a part of what we want our employees to come prepared with the skills while they are still part of the higher ed institution. So, and I see a lot of such things already happening, not so much in US, but I see outside US this becoming a big trend. Like for example, India, where we have a large employee base, most of the large employers, they have a very strong partnership with higher ed institution where they have got a part of the curriculum aligned as per their need. And it's pretty much becoming a trend. Most large employers have select set of colleges where they have got it embedded. So that's one part of it. The second part is our Simplilearn business, wherein we partner with institutions to co-create program and take it to our customers. So there also we see more and more this ask that how can whatever curriculum that you're teaching in partnerships with university, like for example, we have a very strong partnerships with Caltech as an example, right? And we build a lot of programs together with them. So there what we try to do is that how do we embed like learnings from some of our corporate engagements and put it as part of the program, because what is relevant for one corporate is also relevant for a lot of corporates who broadly operate in the same ecosystem. So we see both sides happening.
Great, and really fascinating to get that international perspective that these systems and these partnerships are more advanced in many other parts of the world. Yakut, for a second, if you don't mind, I'm going to go through I'm going to jump back to you and Aarti to finish up, and if we're going to move to Josh next and then Raya, because I think we'll get that way the bunch perspectives of the intermediaries, and then we'll get the institutional view.
Okay, great. So I work at Wiley. We work with both the academic higher ed side of this and really try to provide career-relevant, applied, career-connected education tools for faculty and universities to be able to make sure that the skills that are being developed and the preparation is aligned to the needs of the market, and try to bring those insights back from the market at scale to empower the classroom. And then on the other side, we work with corporations and we help them develop their talent. We run hire, train, deploy programs where we will literally recruit, train, put people on our payroll and deploy them inside companies to meet their specific needs. And we have everything DISC, so we are doing team effectiveness. So we work on both sides of this, and I think one of the big observations I have is that this relationship needs to be intermediated because there's so many differences in the decision-making criteria, the language, the clock speeds, the metrics of success, that either an employer committing to have a person or team that can reach out to higher ed, or higher ed having people that can carry, or intermediate organizations themselves that can help bridge that gap is critical to making these partnerships go from an individual caring, and then when that person leaves the organization, it all goes away. But to institutionalize it, I think intermediary relationships are critical.
Great, thanks. Raya?
Like Josh, Cengage works in a lot of different ways within this ecosystem. We have industry-recognized credentials and curriculum that have been critical to training people within and through the higher ed system. And then we have a direct line of work that does that training for employers themselves. So certifications in healthcare, IT, cybersecurity, trades. We work, again, with and through our community college and academic partners generally to make sure people are getting those career-ready certifications. In the past year, we also launched a direct-to-employer solution to recruit, vet, pre-train, and place talent in those key industries with large employers. And like what Josh said, I think that our role in the ecosystem is that, one, we work with employers that have recruiting and demand needs that far outstrip what usually is coming out of existing training systems. And our scale, our capabilities in infrastructure and technology enable us to start really working with those employers, the speed and agility of changing and building those systems for employers in new ways. Now, I think what's critical here is that workforce is inherently a local issue. And so having the local partners, the nonprofit partners, the academic partners, the workforce boards involved in designing and deploying those solutions is critical. And so we become part of that ecosystem, but in many ways I see as a backbone, as an accelerant for solving these massive talent gaps that we see.
Great. Now, moving to the higher ed perspective, Yakut, do you want to jump in here?
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Yakut Gazi. In this role as Vice Provost for Duke Learning Innovation, I oversee continuing studies and learning innovation operations across the board, which means pre-K through grade programs and services. So we sit at the intersection of traditional academia, workforce needs, and the industry. One of the things, most of our programming and services obviously B2C, direct to the learner. But one of the pillars of our strategy is to move away from supply-based programs, which is very, traditionally academia, right? We have these faculty, these strengths, let's offer some programs, to more demand-driven, which puts us in the sphere of what does workforce need, what does the industry need, so on and so forth. I did do some voice exercises inspired by the session yesterday. I don't know if it worked. There are a few things I think, I see as success stories that I would hope to see more of it. First of all, I think the world of work and the world of learning need to start to look a lot like each other over time. I say that because we will live 100 years of lives, right? Our children have a 50% chance of being 100 years old. We will have 60-year curricula where folks will start education at the age of, 3 to 6, and then be educated for their entire lives. And so we need to be able to make sure that folks learn while they work, and then work while they learn. And that work piece while they learn is really important, especially in the age of AI, where we are all threatened by tremendous amount of change in our jobs by AI and automation. What makes us human, so thinking and feeling, rather than doing. So that's the piece that is really important when we talk about skills, right? If generative AI is able to do a lot of the things that we do, what do we do as humans? We need to still think and we need to still feel. And those are the things that folks can learn, or students can learn, if they're immersed in authentic learning environments. And experiential learning is key. I'm going to talk a little more here, but then I promise I won't talk as much for the other questions. So don't be worried. So the thing that I feel like was a huge success, at least in my career, my previous employer at Georgia Tech, we rolled out 3 online master's programs at scale in 2014, 17, and 18, computer science, analytics, and cybersecurity. All of these programs, less than $10,000 for the entire degree. So how did that happen? We worked with industry. We worked with AT&T and Accenture for them to underwrite the initial cost of the program. So $2 million and then another $1 million gift for the computer science degree came from AT&T. And they did it not because they were going to have assigned seats in the program. They saw the value of a computer science degree extremely affordable at scale for the entire workforce, right? So those programs, collectively, those 3, have over 18,000 students right now. Considering Georgia Tech had less than 1,000 students out of 8 programs, fast forward 8, 9 years, 18,000 students, almost half of Georgia Tech. So there is a huge example of intentional collaboration between the industry and higher education that operated at scale. And I'm a proponent of scale solutions to educational problems. I think the time is up for boutique solutions for these immense problems that we have. And scale means there's a huge chance of affordability. Digital learning means there's a huge chance of success. One last thing, and I'm going to stop. And one thing I would wish to see more often happening is higher education is a huge employer. The Ohio State University is #2 employer in the state of Ohio, right after Walmart. The University of Texas in Austin has more employees compared to Dell, which is down the street. My organization, Duke University, has 40,000 employees. In these conversations, we tend to think that we're higher ed and then the world of employers is out there. We need to operate more like employers ourselves, and we need to claim that seat and also respect that seat. So if I'm talking about a shortage of healthcare workers, like you mentioned, Sacha, I need to be sitting down with the head of Duke Health to figure this out, right? To help me figure out how can I solve this problem at scale. So.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point. I think a lot of institutions we've worked with too, with associated medical centers, while in name they share the governance, they don't really work together at all. And the reality is the #1 employer of most university recent graduates is the university itself, which we tend to overlook, right? As like the first job opportunities. And that's how we juice up some of the numbers in US News on the percentage of students that are employed. Anyway, bring it back to Aarti here to finish us up, and then I really do want to spend our time getting into the points of disagreement, because I think we're getting a lot of great perspectives here.
Right, so again, I'm at National Louis University, which is a private nonprofit university serving about 10,000 students per year. We're based in downtown Chicago, but also have significant online enrollment. We are an access institution, so 70% of our students are Pell, 70% of our students are Black or Latinx, and 70% of our students are first gen. And I call that out because our focus at the undergraduate level is on creating multiple pathways to economic mobility for our students. And so we've had a number of initiatives launch over the past few years trying to bridge that gap between higher ed and employers to do that work, both with our bachelor's degree students as well as in our new stackable credentials division called Accelerate U at NLU, which allows students to earn certifications and access to jobs within 6 months. I would say, we've learned a lot along the way, and I would say in terms of what success looks like. I'll echo actually a lot of what Sacha said early on, and that the biggest thing is sort of that dual role of higher ed and employers owning the responsibilities for this work and seeing that buy-in and ownership at multiple levels of the organization. So employers, it's with the CEO level saying this is a moral and economic imperative to do this work and find talent from everywhere. That's also the HR department being bought in and helping with processes, and it's hiring managers. Hiring managers are really the linchpin working with higher ed institutions, because they are saying, not at a high level, just, oh, we need more IT workers. They're saying very specifically, I have this many jobs in this type of role. This is what the top 5% of workers do in terms of their skill set that I want you to train. And these are the challenges I'm facing. It is, is it technical skills? Is it durable skills? Is it simply, all my talent is white and I want more diverse talent and I'm not sure where to find them? And really working closely with institutions to build those programs in sort of rapid prototyping cycles. And then on the institution side, it's the president level saying we're committed to essentially being a workforce development organization and investing the resources to execute this really well.
Great. So first of all, obviously some really impassioned and informed perspectives here on the panel. I think we've gotten a broad landscape view here, but what I want to do is dive into some of these points of disagreement. Just so I know where the audience sits on some of this, just show of hands if you represent a higher ed institution here. Great. Show of hands if you represent an employer. Great. And show of hands if you're an intermediary. Okay, great. So I'd say, I don't know, roughly a third, probably a little bit more weighed in on the perspective of higher ed institutions. So let's get into some of those real details. There are 3 points that when we were preparing for this, we sort of thought we'd really dig into. One is the question of where do you start, big, small employers. The second is what is the role of intermediaries in this system? And the third is higher ed institutions, what should you own versus outsource in this? Now, I didn't realize we'd have so many employers in the room, so if time allows, I think we should maybe be responsive to that and find time to get to that as well in terms of what employers could be doing from their perspective. But let's start on this question of big versus small. So Raya, Aarti, Josh, we kind of were debating this, Lee coming into this. Give me the, Raya, why don't you start us out here? Sure. What's the perspective on big versus small? Where do we start in this ecosystem?
Yeah, so my perspective has always been to build, and I have multiple perspectives on this. One is that we know that actually 90% of employment in this country is through small and medium-sized businesses, right? And so enabling the connections to small and medium-sized businesses is critical. From our perspective in building a business to support employers, however, the larger demand size from an employer that they have, the more impactful we are going to be in order to fulfill that solution. So we talk to hospitals now that have hundreds of thousands of open medical assistance roles across their portfolio, right? And that is a problem that affects their bottom line. It affects their mission, their ability to serve patients effectively. And so generally, those are large employers, right? And we can provide an at-scale solution. So for us, the focus is primarily on large employers. That breaks down in some industries like trades, which is almost made entirely of small and medium-sized businesses, right? And so the real unlock here for intermediaries, for higher ed institutions, and then this is also a place where higher ed institutions are uniquely positioned, is how do you create those connections to small and medium-sized businesses? Because large enterprises are going to have the money to invest. They're going to be able to build their own talent pipeline solutions. They're going to want enterprise partners to be able to do that with. And so I think really it's a both and, which I'm sorry is not the conflict you wanted, Sacha, but I do think as I think about it, it really, the solution has to be sort of multimodal.
Great. Well, let me, Aarti, you've been a proponent for starting maybe with the smaller employers. Let's understand that.
So yeah, you're not going to like this. I'm going to agree with the both and in totality, but I will say I think
so is both and.
I do think you need to start small, and so we have seen the benefits of scale from large employers, but I think the benefits of starting small are evident in a few ways. One is I do agree with this point around community impact in that, frankly, smaller employers often don't have the resources or brand to put toward recruiting the best talent, and so if you're an institution really focused on local community impact, smaller employers might be the place to do that. The other thing is the nimbleness of piloting new things, right? And so a smaller company is more likely to experiment with new talent strategies. How do we speed up this hiring process from 4 weeks to 1 week? How do we speed up, how do we shift mentoring and onboarding learners in a different way to make them have a positive onboarding experience, right? And so you have that nimbleness where you can sort of, again, rapid cycle prototype and get feedback from employers as well if things aren't working so the institution can rapidly adjust. I also think, again, from my standpoint, thinking particularly about first-generation college goers, from a learner perspective, we often see many of our learners experiencing imposter syndrome when they enter the workplace, and so a smaller employer with that sort of family feel is often able to wrap around that new employee in a really, really productive and positive, welcoming way. Whereas a new employee might get lost in the crowd in a larger employer. It doesn't always happen, but it can be the case. I do want to call out again the scale benefit of large employers, but one thing that's really interesting that we've seen in our medical assistant program in Chicago, we've worked with 3 large hospital healthcare systems and 4 small community-based hospitals. And one interesting trend we've seen that may not be evident across industries is the smaller hospitals are more willing to pay learners during their apprenticeship extern experience, right? As opposed to waiting until after the students actually graduate with their credential and start full time. And it seems largely because of sort of embedded bureaucracy policies that are tough to change, whereas this is a great example of a small hospital being willing to adjust, and that is an equity issue, right? You can't expect a low-income learner to not be paid for 3 months while they're in an apprenticeship.
Great. In the interest of time, Josh, if it's okay, I'm going to ask, can you help us with the second sort of key point we want to dig into, which is the role of intermediaries. So maybe you could help us lay a little context for understanding sort of what's happened in the world of, both, you can speak for, I don't want to put you in the position to speak for Cengage, but, Wiley, Cengage's perspective on what's been happening in this field, and how does that inform potentially what you're thinking about doing today?
Briefly, huh? I answer all those questions. Yeah, so I think that, look, there's this tension between scale, where you try to get the repeatability, and the reality that hiring decisions are so local. Think about how many times you've hired. If somebody said, hey, I'm going to bring you 20 people, will you hire them sight unseen? Like, no way, right? And so you try to create this scale, and I think that's where, when you're working with large organizations who are doing large volume hiring, you can build custom programs. Right? You can understand their needs, you can backwards map, you can look at the skills, the competencies, and they're going to invest the time and energy in creating that program with you. And that's a reasonable path. But somebody's got to be there to sort of build that custom program, and I think intermediaries, either from an organization like Cengage or Wiley that's doing that, or a local nonprofit, but helping to do that bridging. Or you say, we're going to scale the other way, which is with these smaller, maybe smaller employers, and you're able to say, here's the program, it's good enough, but we're going to outsource and build that program. So I do think that, again, the matching of these clocks, Michael Crow calls these boundary-spanning organizations, right, who can stand in between and run the shuttle diplomacy and say, your decision-making framework is on a different pace, but here's what we need from you, and build trust on both sides, because ultimately this isn't about just competency maps. It's really, hiring is a trust issue and a leap of faith issue. And so who is transferring that trust to the hiring manager, to the organization, so that they have confidence, or who is de-risking this, right? So when we do hire, train, deploy, we put them on our payroll. So we hire them and we will put them for 12 to 24 months. When we've trained them, we're paying them as they learn, and then we're deploying them into that employer and say, we're going to keep supporting them, and when you're ready, you move them onto your payroll. So someone's got to address this question of trust and risk, and I think that's one of the key roles for intermediaries.
Let me just, that to me, that question of trust and risk is at the center of the role of the intermediary, and there's also a piece that's about de-risking it for the learner, that the learner knows that the outcome is there, that this is not a training program that has no outcome, right, that the commitment to hire is there. So that de-risking really goes both ways and is critical to the success.
And if I could ask you to expound a little bit on that, because one of the things we'd also talked about is the evolution of intermediaries from more white label solutions to more platforms, and changing the definition of what that looks like. Why then, help us understand, given this need to de-risk, how that has really transformed the actual offerings that intermediaries are putting forth in the market.
Well, I can start. So I think of skills, roles, hires. Right? Skills are broad, and I think that's the first place that higher ed should be starting. We recently did some research with Burning Glass Institute and Business Higher Education Forum and looked at the skills that have the most value and the most breadth across a number of industries and disciplines, and there's 4 that rose to the top. Social media, product management, AI, ML, and cloud. And that those 4 what does that look like in healthcare? What does that look like in finance? What does that look like in history, right? All of those things and so you can build that, and you should be doing that today as a higher ed institution, and how do you do that? Then there's roles, which is what does it look like to be a cloud architect in financial services? That's hard skills, it's soft skills. That's where you have more narrow programs, and I see intermediaries operating there. And then there's like, how do you actually hire, right? And that's where you need to connect all the dots. And so I think of the breadth leading to specific outcomes for individuals.
I'll be really quick here, but I do think that the other role that, as I see as offerings advance, I actually see that what I'm excited about is more of these funnel and talent pipeline solutions coming to the fore. Employers, for the most part, are not going to change their behaviors. They need us institutions to match they set the spec, right? Employers set the spec, and it's on all of us to build the systems that are going to get people in the door. And so a platform solution that asks employers to change the spec is not going to have a promise to the student. And so the pipeline solutions that are starting to be built, and that intermediaries can really build and create those distinct funnels for employers to match those skills jobs that the spec has been set, is what I think is really going to be exciting in the next couple years.
Great. Want to jump to the next issue here, and then Krishna, if you would help me on that, coming back to the employer side next, so that we make sure we get time for that. Particularly Aarti and Yakut, help us understand from where you sit on the higher ed side. We've now heard from the intermediary perspective about what they'd like to be providing to the higher ed institutions. What is your perspective on what you should be actually outsourcing and what you should be actually keeping in-house and developing your own capabilities around?
right? So we've tried both, so I can share a little bit about that. But I do want to kind of step back and provide a little defense and argument for higher ed doing a lot of this work, right? I actually think higher ed institutions are better positioned than most organizations to do this work well, given the resources they have, which are essentially workforce development resources. If you think about it, we have learning design capabilities to rapidly stand up academic programs. We have training spaces in our classrooms. We have wraparound resources and mental health services and emergency funds and food pantries that learners may need. We have access to financial aid through Pell, right? We have great teachers. We have all these resources that another organization coming in would take some time to stand up and build from scratch and provide all the wraparound services. So that being said, that's my argument for higher ed, but I will say we've experimented with both. When we launched our medical assistant program a couple of years ago, we parallel path building it in-house and then outsourcing part of the work, and we've seen benefits of both. And so building it in-house, we launched in Chicago locally where we're based, and we did all the recruitment ourselves, we did all the curriculum, technical skills design ourselves, we're doing the career coaching, and we're doing all the employer engagement and placing students, and also getting that rapid feedback from employers during the externship experiences so we can adjust, right? In parallel, we launched a collaboration with Propel America, which is a national nonprofit working to prepare students for post-secondary and career pathway success as well. And they are using our online technical skills curriculum in medical assisting and accessing Pell financial aid as part of NLU's program, but they are doing the local recruiting of learners in cities that we aren't currently operating in, recruiting of employers, and also doing the hands-on career coaching of durable skills. And what we're seeing so far is the Propel partnership is really allowing us to scale rapidly into cities we otherwise don't operate in. But what we are able to do, at least so far, locally and where we're managing it end to end, is manage those rapid cycles of employer feedback. So we heard a few weeks ago that learners were struggling to take notes from their supervisors on directions and feedback of what they needed to do next and do differently. The very next day we bought 500 notebooks and trained students on, okay, here's professional note taking and all of that, right, and gave them homework, and we were able to adjust. So that's not to say we can't do that when part of it's outsourced, but it's just a little extra coordination to make that happen.
Great. Yakut, what's your thought here?
I'm going to be trying to be brief, so you have some time. So I think this conversation changes over time. When I was at Texas A&M in 1999, you know how old I am now, rolling out the first online program there, we did everything in-house, including the platform. It was built on Cold Fusion. Now we cringe at the thought of building a platform on-prem, right? And just 10 years ago, we were having heated conversations with our IT folks in our institutions about cloud services, right? I mean, how can you put anything out there? Everything needs to be on-prem. And our IT colleagues now came to an understanding that it doesn't really define their core function if the servers are not on campus, right? It's exactly the opposite, and there is just so few things that are on campus. To me, my current thinking, which may change in a few years, anything that revolves around instructional delivery needs to be owned, needs to be core competency for institutions of higher ed. So who is your faculty, who generates your content, who develops instructional design and development activities, and media development and all that, with maybe an opportunity to do capacity increase at times of need. But to me, that's something that is core to higher ed. Now, what intermediaries do for higher ed is generate capacity for the things that we don't have at this moment, right? We partner, we roll out, but to me that first partnership phase is very important for the higher ed institution to figure out what of these things are really core to who I am. Like if I'm putting something in front of learners coming out of Duke, am I not going to have Duke faculty? Am I not going to have Duke content? So what is it that makes it Duke that I need to own? In addition to instructional content, I think market analysis, market research, to me is an important piece that not necessarily the tools to create on campus, but the responsibility for that and the interpretation of the market needs, if nothing else, for the employer aspect of higher ed institution, right? For me to create my own talent strategy, I have to have that skill and competency in-house.
Great. So we only have about 5 minutes left, and Krishna, I want to weave this back in. Sorry, I know you've had perspectives on a lot of these. feel free to opine on any of these as well if you'd wish, but I know you work with a lot of employers and you've got sort of the perspective globally as well. For the employers in the room, what would be your guidance if you were sort of take the same question of what's their role in this? How would you encourage them to engage with this system most effectively?
Yeah. So first, I want to just add one more perspective. We talked about a model wherein, as an intermediary, you have higher ed, you have employers, you partner them together to recruit, train, and deploy them at those employers. But I think another large model exists wherein higher ed institutions, employers, they partner together to offer that program to any learners who wants to take that program. Now the control is in the hand of the learner, whether they want to join that particular employer who co-created program with the higher ed, or they go and join anywhere who's looking for a similar kind of skill. So as Simplilearn, we operate more in that market, that identify the hottest skills in the market, again, same as what Josh showed, cloud, data, cyber. Identify the most visible employer in that particular area which is known for doing cutting-edge work in that. Go and tie up with a higher ed institution and offer to any learner. No string attached, you learn the course, there are so many opportunities available in the market, and you decide which one gives you the highest economic mobility. So I think that model also is becoming more and more prevalent, that employer is open to hire from that particular trained pool of talent that is available, but at the same time, that talent is not tied to go back to the same employer. There are maybe others who are giving them more career options. So we see that also going to become a much stronger trend, because the power is going in the hand of the learners, at least those who can afford. Of course, those who want to get free training and they can't afford, they don't have a choice either. So I think that I'm personally a big fan of that model, because at the end of the day, we're talking about humans, we're talking about people, and we're talking about giving more power in their hand, right? So,
yeah, no, that makes sense. In the waning minutes here, we had talked about bringing it home with this question of, as you consider all these puts and takes, as you consider what you're willing to share in terms of your roadmap, and with the consideration that we do have employers in the room more than I think I would have anticipated, which is really helpful. And we've also talked about the fact that a lot of this has to be demand driven. What do you see in terms of your roadmap of what you're willing to share here, in terms of what you think is going to have to come next to get back from our current state to the desired future state that we started the session with? And particularly, what does that implicate? What's the implication of that for the employers in the room who are listening to this, because they are the demand signal for this market? Aarti, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll just share briefly two things that we're focused on at NLU. One is scaling by simply offering more credentials, so building the partnerships and the programs to meet more local labor market needs. Specifically, our next couple coming up are Cisco networking and cybersecurity, and many more over the next 18 to 24 months. The second thing is, I think, a critical need across higher ed, and in this whole work of bridging with employers, we're actually designing a playbook to help other colleges see this is how we are managing these rapid cycles of starting with employer demand and digesting that to create programs within 6 months and then collect employer feedback on an ongoing basis. So really illustrating at a very granular level in a playbook what that looks like, so others can learn from us.
Great. Maya?
I think I'll say two things. The first is that the most important thing for employers to do is to commit to hiring. That is, and provide the spec and provide the alignment down the organization to actually ensure that that promise is made, right? And that's why the close partnership on all levels is critical to making that happen. For us, that means healthcare. That means cybersecurity is going to launch later this month for us in hire, train, deploy models. We are looking at multiple other industries where we know we can deliver to that spec. And, but that commitment from employers, that deep partnership, that recognizing that hiring differently is going to get you better outcomes is really what's critical.
Yeah, and a lot of employers also starting to see this not as a CSR play, but as actually core to your bottom line, right? Actually understanding this is actually the purpose of your...
There's real return on this, and to be able to model that out and work closely with your partners to see that return through.
That's right. Josh?
So I'm personally really passionate about 80% ready talent, because I think that's the way we expand the talent pool. And for us, we're building a diagnostic for employers to take their top 5 hardest to fill jobs, most critical jobs, and then identifying the nearest neighbor pools of 80% ready talent. and what pathways then they should be deploying, whether it's a education benefit program with a local university, whether it's a hire, train, deploy, whether it's a last mile training program, an internal upskilling, reskilling program. And so that can be an internal or external talent. So that diagnostic will make it easier for people to visualize the shortest path and what's the best fit program to then fit into that pathway.
Great. Yakut.
Two priorities: impact of AI on teaching, learning, as well as jobs, and then K through 12 learning losses as a result of the pandemic. It's a supply chain issue that we're overseeing.
You like to wrap us up?
If I got your questions right, you're saying what should employer do? So there are ways they can directly engage with an higher ed, and whether they should engage with an intermediary. So my suggestion is that if you're looking to so if you are trying to identify who adds what kind of values, of course, what Yakut said, that the biggest value that that higher ed institution has is the learning delivery, the control on the learning component, and the biggest value that I see an intermediary adding in the entire process is that being more solution-oriented, trying to understand your problem, being flexible, being service-oriented to ensure that what we offer actually meets your demand.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we all wish these sessions were not 40 minutes long, but gave a lot of time for questions. This by no means should be the end of the conversation. All the panelists, we're going to meet you outside here through these doors, and we'll be available for questions. So we'll do sort of organic Q&A if you have them. We would encourage anyone to come and chat with us and ask everything that was on your mind. I would also sort of end with the first point, which is this is holistic. This is a commitment. This is not something we're just going to simply solve with little iterative moves, and we really appreciate your coming here to be part of this conversation. Thank you to the panelists for their perspectives. Thank you to our audience.